Ripped off, out of pocket, short-changed. No one likes getting a bad deal.
But knowing who to trust can be tough.
This company was just giving me the runaround.
So when your money is under threat and you think you've lost out, Rip Off Britain is here to help.
We'll be investigating the companies that you say are letting you down.
I was so angry. They took away a lot from me.
And we're taking on the scammers who are causing heartache and misery.
I was such a mess. Somebody's just taken all my life savings out of my account.
So whether it's a mistake that's left you out of pocket or a blatant rip-off, we're here to help you find out what you can do about it. This is Rip Off Britain.
Hello and welcome to Rip Off Britain. You know, when it feels like you're David facing Goliath, we're here to help you get your voice heard.
Too right. Coming up today, we're on the case of the broadband companies that were instructed to make it easier for people to switch, but missed the deadline by a country mile. One firm left this woman with no internet connection for 3 months.
I had no communication with friends and family over Christmas. That's what was getting me frantic. It makes you feel more isolated. It really does.
Dreadful. Plus, the tenants whose homes are blighted with damp and mould. A lot has changed to strengthen the rights for some people since we first started talking about it, but still millions will be left in the cold. We'll have advice for anyone in that seemingly helpless situation.
And in the advice clinic, personal finance expert Emma Munbode is helping one woman who was forced to cook Christmas dinner on a camping stove after not one, but 2 cookers conked out. Now, the third one's gone kaput, so she wants her money back, and she's hoping that Emma can help.
But first, if today's programme is all about those times when the other side seems to hold all the cards, then that can never feel more true than when you're dealing with a big insurance claim.
For the woman in our first film today, that claim should have given her the security to start a new life with her young daughter. But tucked away in the insurer's small print was a devastating clause that she never saw coming. Home for Claire Brown and her daughter Matilda was this tiny terraced house in St Neots near Cambridge.
This is the bedroom that I share with my daughter. We're both in here together. It's not ideal. I want her to have her own space. And as you can see, this just isn't it. The house is a rented house, so I don't feel like we can make our own mark.
They've been renting the whole of Matilda's life. But in autumn 2022, Claire bought what would be her first house with her daughter nearby, with much more space to call their own.
I loved this house from the first time I saw it. I was really excited. And my daughter was really excited too.
It was set to be the perfect Christmas present.
We completed at the very end of November, and I was expecting to move in early January.
But moving in day, sadly, never came. At the start of December, a wave of icy weather struck swathes of the UK, freezing the pipes in thousands of properties, including Claire's new home.
That morning when I walked in, this is where I could hear the water pouring. It was pouring down the wall, coming down just like a water feature down the side of the wall.
Frozen pipes had led the cold water tank in Claire's loft to overflow, and as she wasn't there to spot any telltale leaks, by the time she arrived, water was causing catastrophic damage in the floors below.
The water was just cascading through the ceiling, down the stairs. You could see into the kitchen, and I could see the devastation. The carpets were all soaked as well. It was down behind the doors. There was just water everywhere.
It was a shock, but one comfort was her home insurance that she'd taken out at the same time as her mortgage.
Because I'd got the insurance, I thought it would be okay. I took photographs of everything and showed them exactly where the water had come through.
The insurance company, You Insure, appointed an agent to inspect the damage, and in February, Claire received an email with some good news.
It says, "We are happy to accept the claim under escape of water peril. We are able to arrange drying, electrician and a contractor for the reinstatement works. I was really pleased that it was going to be sorted out.
Claire's repairs were urgent, so she quickly set about getting quotes from local builders, ranging from £78,000 to £86,000. But when she sent these off, Claire says she was told it might affect her claim if she began any type of repair herself.
The implication of that was very clear. Don't do anything, because anything you do might mean that I'm not covered.
Desperate to get started on the repairs, Claire chased insurer, but the delays dragged on for 4 months.
I emailed, I called, I left messages.
Despite regular contact with the company, which would promise to chase up her case with the underwriters, Claire says she was unable to make any progress on the claim. Meanwhile, the effect of the water on her house really took hold. As these pictures reveal, damp turned to mould, and the damage to her home got worse and worse.
That original quote of £80,000 is not going to cover it now. You know, the mould spread, rooms that could have been dried out and saved. There's no way that anything could be saved. The whole house was damp and mouldy and rotten.
Claire had been paying both her mortgage and her rent for 7 months by this point. But then came a letter from insurer.
They said they were refusing it on the basis that the house was unfurnished at the time of the leak. And I just couldn't believe it. I cried so much. I was just absolutely devastated.
Claire complained, but the insurer was adamant. Pointing to a clause in the policy, it said properties left unoccupied or unfurnished are not covered for water damage.
When I took out the insurance policy, I read through it. Nothing made me think that I wasn't doing the right thing. I didn't know how I was going to cope, and I couldn't believe that I'd ended up in this situation. It was awful.
Claire is facing a colossal task to get her home back on track, putting her little family under terrible strain.
It's taken everything I have. It's taken all my savings and credit cards, and I'm at the point of having to ask family to help me as well. And I don't think there's going to be enough money to finish the house. It breaks my heart that my daughter says stuff to me now like, can we afford that? And I don't want her to have to think about the fact that life is really hard. She's a little girl and she doesn't deserve that.
Claire has asked the Financial Ombudsman Service to look into insurer's decision, hoping against hope that it finds in her favour. Because a year after getting the keys to what should have been their wonderful new home, Claire and Matilda are facing an uncertain future.
It makes me really sad looking at the house, because we should be living there by now. Sometimes I just drive past just to look at it, because we're not there and we should be, and the house is just a shell. Inside there's nothing there anymore. And that makes me really, really sad.
Well, I'm pleased to say that Claire is with me, and I'm also joined by consumer journalist Felicity Hanna. But first, Claire, a terrible story and awful things you've been through. How have things been since we were filming with you?
So the builders are still in, we're still working. We've got some plasterboard up on the walls now, and it's looking a little bit more like a home.
Yes.
But not much of a house,
So
really.
how much has all this cost you so far, and what are you reckoning on the actual amount you're going to need to get the whole thing sorted?
I've spent so far about £48,000.
What?
Yeah.
Blimey.
And I think probably looking at somewhere in the region of 30 or 40,000 still to go.
Wow. I'm trying desperately to do the arithmetic in my head, but what does that come out as?
Somewhere around the £100,000 mark.
That is extraordinary. But I gather, actually, there's been some good news in the last few days, hasn't there? The Ombudsman has found in your favour, but the insurer still has time to appeal that decision.
Yes.
Where does that leave you, do you think?
I'm really hopeful that the insurers will come back and agree to all the suggestions that the Ombudsman made. and cover the costs for me so we can get the project finished.
Well, Felicity, what do you make of the Ombudsman's response?
Well, I think what's heartbreaking is how long Claire's been in limbo.
Yeah.
But the Ombudsman says the insurer's original decision was based on the home being unfurnished when the leak happened, and that is a clause in its T's and C's. But when the Ombudsman looks at a complaint, it doesn't just look at the clauses, at the terms. It also looks at whether those are relevant to the actual claim. And it wasn't. Claire's lack of furniture in her house at the time made absolutely no difference to the leak. So the Ombudsman says, well, that was wrong. But also, it acknowledges that the insurer took months to come to any kind of decision. And during all that time, the home has been deteriorating even more. That was clearly a mistake, is what the Ombudsman says.
A dire situation. But, Claire, 24 hours ago, we got this message from your insurers. Following the Financial Ombudsman Service review, we will be settling the claim as quickly as possible.
Oh my God.
We'll also be offering Ms Brown £900 compensation for the stress caused during this time. You're welling up. Oh, well, how wonderful that we're able to give you such good news.
Thank you.
It's the kind of shock that's a wonderful shock, isn't it?
It is. It really is. It just means that I don't have to worry anymore.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for bringing the story to us. And I'm sorry to see you in distress, but actually it's in a very good cause.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
really
so
good.
pleased. They're tears of happiness.
They are.
Well, while Claire gets over that wonderful news, there's one small detail in her policy that we should pick up on. It said that her home wouldn't be covered for leaks if it was unoccupied or unfurnished, and it's a clause that could easily catch you out.
I think most people don't know that your typical home insurance policy doesn't allow the house to be empty for usually 30 days at a time. And if you are away during that time, for that length of time, your insurance policy won't cover you. And I think you need to just be really aware. You need to understand exactly what you are and aren't covered for, so there's no nasty surprises when something like this comes up.
So basic advice, T's and C's, make sure you read them.
They're not interesting, but they are important.
Yeah. Is there any special insurance for people with empty homes?
You can take out a specific policy. It's known as empty homes insurance or sometimes unoccupied homes insurance. Now, as with any product like this, not all policies are equal. So most will cover you for fire damage, flood damage. I would always suggest looking at a policy that also includes some legal protection. So if you have squatters moving in, it'll give you that support to help get them out.
Well, Claire, I know you're going to be rushing home and giving your daughter a very special cuddle now. And it's been wonderful to be able to give you good news. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you, Felicity, for your advice. And when we spoke to the Association of British Insurers, it told us that its members are committed to paying all claims as quickly and efficiently as possible, and will only ever decline a claim if there are valid reasons for doing so. The ABI added that it's in no one's interest if customers don't fully understand what they are insured for, stressing that it's important to read and understand your insurance policy and speak to your insurer if you're unsure about anything. The Financial Ombudsman Service echoed that and added that if consumers don't feel they've been treated fairly, they should ask it to investigate their complaint, which of course Claire did and is very, very happy with the result.
Time now for our advice clinic, where our experts are on hand to stand up for your rights. Well, in the advice clinic with me today is personal finance expert from Telegraph Money, Emma Munbode. Hi, Emma, good to have you with us. But also joining us, we've got Jenny Lamont from her home in Wiltshire. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Angela.
Now, I gather you've had a problem with a Rangemaster cooker, or probably I should say cookers, because you've had rather more than one since 2022, haven't you? Give me the saga.
Yes, I've had a total so far of 3 Rangemaster cookers. The first being ordered and delivered in October 2022. The first cooker stopped working. So we went back to the original retailer and got a replacement cooker.
So that was cooker number 2.
That was cooker number 2. Literally a couple of weeks later, the cooker stopped working. So that was November in 2022. And I reported it to the retailer, who suggested that we go back to Rangemaster to raise a complaint and to get it fixed. and then I was toing and froing because it was getting towards Christmas. I eventually heard from them on the 21st of December to say that we could go back to the retailer and order another cooker.
So what did you do for Christmas dinner?
We had a camping baby belling cooker. I don't know if you remember the old-fashioned cookers where it's a little oven with a little hob on top. So that's what we cooked Christmas lunch on.
Cooker number 3 didn't arrive until March, and all was going well until October 2023, when that one broke down too. An engineer visited and said the problem this time was a faulty hob, promising to get the part replaced.
The following week, the engineer came out, knocked on the front door and said, "I'm very sorry, but I've got the box, but the part isn't in it." And I think that was the point that I quite frankly lost all faith.
Have you got cooker number 4 now then?
No, we haven't.
Right, so you're still without a cooker. OK, I'm going to ask Emma what she makes of all of this.
What a saga. So how much does this all set you back, Jenny?
Over £1,000 plus time to actually deal with all of this.
I'm not surprised you want your money back. At the end of the day, you paid for a product that you expected that would be reliable and trustworthy, and instead you've just spent the past year trying to chase repairs and replacements, and it's just not what you signed up for at all.
What is the solution for someone who might find themselves in a situation like this?
So under the Consumer Rights Act, if an item is faulty, you have 30 days for a full refund. You take that up with the retailer directly. If there's an issue between 30 days and 6 months, again, it's the retailer that's responsible, but in those situations, they have a right to replace or repair the item before issuing your money back. Now, it's slightly trickier when it gets past that 6-month period. After that point, the onus is on you to prove that you haven't broken or damaged the items. The good news is that many electricals these days come with a guarantee or a warranty, so if it breaks down, you can usually use that as backup.
Well, as you can imagine, Jenny, we've been in touch with Rangemaster, indeed with all the parties that are involved in this story. And Rangemaster explained that you were offered a replacement cooker because of a shortage of parts, which meant that they couldn't actually repair the original. Rangemaster has now offered, and this is where we come to the good news, it's offered you a full refund, not just of the cooker, but as a gesture of goodwill, it's also going to reimburse the money that you paid to the electrician as well. We also did speak to the retailer that you bought the cooker from in the first place. It told us it wasn't aware of your issue, but that when it found out, it took the matter very seriously and offered its support. And it says that Rangemaster has now given it the relevant details it needs to provide you with a replacement cooker. So you're going to get cooker number 4. Jenny, what do you make of that?
Well, that makes me very happy, Angela, and I would like to say thank you to the Rip Off Britain team and to all of the people involved, and yeah, a happy resolution. Thank you very much.
Well, a nice way to start the new year, we hope, and we don't want to hear about you having to find cooker number 5. Jenny, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Emma, thank you for your advice as well.
Now, as you know, we wouldn't be here without our inbox. It's where you send all your stories, you tell us what you like, what you don't like, and what issues fire you up. And last October, we talked about one subject that really fired you up, believe me.
That's right. In our recent live series, we met a woman who discovered she'd been overcharged by her energy company and run up more than £6,000 in credit, and she was struggling to get it back. Well, that film prompted a lot of you to tell us about very similar experiences. George Brown on email says he has a credit balance of £1,400, but his supplier will seemingly try anything not to refund it. George says he was on hold for 40 minutes to speak to someone, who then put him on hold for another 20 minutes, and then he got cut off. Classic.
Makes you so angry, that, doesn't it? And I've got one here from Wesley Miller, who emailed after he was trying to tie up the affairs of his late mother-in-law and discovered that she had built up £1,000 in credit, the equivalent of about 5 months' direct debit payments. Wesley says, how can a company keep such a large sum without voluntarily returning at least some of it to customers who could be putting it to very good use? I agree.
And Rose Simmons on email has been in touch and says she was helping her brother work out his bills after his energy company suddenly took £2,100 a couple of months ago. After much to and fro, she gave the firm up-to-date meter readings and discovered he was, wait for it, £11,000 in credit. And then, much to Rose's horror, the phone line cut off.
Well, Rose, we really hope you were able to get back in touch with them and that the money is now back with you. If it isn't, the advice for anyone struggling to get their credit reimbursed is first to make sure your meter readings are up to date. Then request the refund, and if it's not repaid, make a formal complaint. After that, the energy company has 8 weeks to deal with it, and if they don't, you can take it to the Energy Ombudsman.
Now, from energy to insurance, it's no secret that switching some providers can bag you a significant saving, and most of the time it's not even all that complicated to do. However, when it comes to switching broadband, the process isn't always as smooth, which is why in 2021, the industry regulator instructed broadband companies to make some big changes. The only problem is, many of those broadband companies just didn't really toe the line.
I have to spend hours on the phone calls, emails, endless hours, afternoons, just trying to get somebody to listen.
Nicola Craig lives alone in the heart of Northumberland National Park, so staying connected is really crucial.
This is a particularly isolated rural area. We haven't got a bus. It's 9 miles to the doctors. I love to live here, but you still need connection with the outside world. My internet for me is important. It's communication, friendship, it's banking, shopping, all just the little things.
Nicola's existing broadband contract was up for renewal just before Christmas 2022. So in November, she decided to shop around for a better deal and in good time to ensure that she had the internet over the festive period.
I didn't have any worries because previously it's just been as smooth as silk.
After some careful searching, she plumped for a deal with PlusNet with the promise of a transfer on Christmas Eve. But when Nicola called to check on the progress of the switch, I'm afraid her initial confidence soon faltered.
Every 2 days, a lovely lady on the line said, "I'm sorry, we're having a difficulty providing it by the 24th of December.
As the days and weeks passed by, absolutely nothing changed. So when Nicola's contract with Vodafone came to an end and PlusNet couldn't connect her, she was cut off and really anxious.
I had no communication with friends and family over Christmas. That's what was getting me frantic in a way. Being able to say to somebody, "Hi, Merry Christmas," everything, really. So I was desperate. It makes you feel more isolated. It really does.
Do you know, it took 4 days for PlusNet to get back in touch, and it wasn't with the news that Nicola had been expecting.
They decided to tell me that they'd closed the account because they simply couldn't solve the technical difficulties.
Nicola called anybody she thought might be able to help. Other suppliers, her previous provider, even the industry regulator, but she couldn't make any headway.
By this time, I mean, sobbing, really getting uptight. It was sending me batty. All I want is a simple laptop in front of me and be able to do what I do.
In the end, Nicola gave up on PlusNet and tried another switch to BT, which eventually went through. But the whole sorry saga left her without the internet for 3 very, very long months.
I was so angry, so frustrated. There was so much uncertainty about everything. That took away a lot from me. Heaven knows what I'm going to do when this contract ends, but I'm going to be panicking. It's had a rotten effect on me.
In a bid to stamp out the sort of delays Nicola experienced, in September 2021, telecoms regulator Ofcom demanded that all suppliers introduce a system called one-touch switching, which would simplify things for customers. It set a deadline of April 2023 for them all to introduce the system, but the industry has well and truly failed to meet it. In the meantime, more people are suffering a stressful switch. Like Trevor Jones from Leeds, in May 2023, more than a month after One Touch Switch was supposed to be brought in, he helped his mother-in-law Margaret switch from BT to PlusNet after spotting a deal on comparison site Uswitch. It looked like it was going to be absolutely straightforward.
The way the site presented the issue was just, you don't need to do anything. You'll get an email when your old service is going to go away and the new service kicks in. And we just sat back, patted ourselves on the back and said, that was easy.
A router was delivered to Margaret's home within a few days of the order being placed, but I'm afraid it didn't work. Trevor got in touch with PlusNet, who said there was an issue with the line transfer.
And they went, oh, yeah, we're still waiting for BT to release the number because there's some kind of issue with the broadband part. We asked what it was, and the guy didn't know.
A week passed with no update, so Trevor called Margaret's original provider, BT.
And they said, yeah, that's because the order's been cancelled. And I was like, we haven't cancelled it. And they didn't know who'd cancelled it.
With no one sure who cancelled the order, PlusNet started the process again. After much back and forth, there was a full 2 weeks between Margaret's BT service being switched off and PlusNet taking over. 2 weeks in which she had no internet connection at all.
She was pretty kind of lost because she uses the internet every day. She watches lots and lots of YouTube videos on crafting and other subjects. Right? All of that was gone.
Margaret did eventually get back online, but at 7 weeks from start to finish, it was a long way from the simple process it should have been.
But it seemed to be diametrically opposed to the one-click switchover. I mean, imagine being without electricity for 2 weeks or gas for 2 weeks while you switch supply. It'd be an outrage. In the internet world, didn't seem to matter.
And while both the cases that we've featured involved PlusNet, the continued delays to the introduction of one-touch switching means that customers of all providers are still waiting for a guaranteed, fuss-free way to move their broadband service.
When we spoke to PlusNet, it apologised for the problems Trevor and his mother-in-law Margaret faced, explaining that the delay was caused by repeated failures in the transfer of her line from BT. But now Margaret is connected, PlusNet hopes that she'll be able to enjoy her craft videos.
As for Nicola's case, BT, which also owns PlusNet, explained that there were complications releasing her account from her previous supplier and setting up a new account. BT says the customer service Nicola experienced fell well below its usual standards, so it's apologised and issued a credit on the account as a gesture of goodwill.
Well, I think you'd agree a lot of issues there, and our personal finance expert, Emma Munbode, is back to discuss this with me, and Emma will come to you very shortly. But first, I want to talk to Richard Newdegg from comparison service Uswitch, and he's on the line now. So, Richard, welcome to the programme. So in that film, we realised that Trevor and Margaret used Uswitch, but that didn't go very well at all. So what's your comment on that?
Well, I think the big picture here is that it's really important that consumers have confidence in the broadband switching process because people can often save quite a lot of money and get access to faster speeds when they do change broadband provider. Now, it's particularly a shame here because PlusNet and BT are part of the same group and they're on the same network, the Openreach network, where the industry processes around switching are actually quite well established and should work really well, where there's very little downtime and the switch is all handled for you.
I was just checking, and one of the experiences there happened in June 2023, which is after the date that Ofcom had set for introduction of what's known as one-touch switching. Now, for the rest of us, what exactly does that mean?
The idea behind one-touch switch is that regardless of the network that you're going from or to or your circumstances, you can be totally confident that the process will be handled by your new provider. The switch will happen on one single day. You're not going to double pay for services or anything like that. The trouble is, though, is Ofcom set the deadline of April 23 and it wasn't met by industry. So it's now late to be delivered.
But whose fault is it then? Is it the companies? Or is it Ofcom? Or where does the blame lie?
We think the whole industry has got to take some blame, including the regulator. It is technically complex to do, a big new switching system, but the truth is they didn't get started quickly enough and therefore weren't ready by the time the deadline came along. We would certainly encourage at Uswitch that everyone in the industry, the broadband industry, really pulls their finger out and makes sure they meet that deadline so consumers don't have to suffer with inadequate processes for any longer.
Well, I don't like this sort of line. We're working towards that, particularly when they miss the deadline. But back to Emma now. What advice do you give people who actually want to switch before this whole thing kicks in?
So I would say, first of all, check your contract. If you're still in contract, you could be subject to exit penalties when you're switching, and that can cause huge delays and it can be quite expensive too. So then I would say shop around. There's lots of competition in the broadband market, so take advantage of that. So you can haggle with your current supplier and potential other suppliers to kind of find a good deal for you. It's also worth noting that if you're on certain benefits, you might be entitled to a social tariff, which means your broadband could be reduced to as much as £12 a month. And then lastly, I would say check your speed. If you're not getting the speed that you were promised and your supplier can't actually meet that, you can actually exit your contract penalty-free. So that's
Yes, I was just going to say, what rights do you have if it does all go wrong?
So there is an automatic compensation scheme for delayed repairs, missed or failed appointments and delayed installations. Now, this all depends on whether your supplier is on the automatic compensation scheme itself. Most suppliers are, though. You can actually find a full list on the Ofcom website. Any compensation must be paid within 30 days of the issue occurring. And finally, if you are looking to switch, your contract provider has to get in touch with you in the last couple of months to make you aware of their best deals at that point in time.
There's a lot involved in all of that, but thank you very much indeed, Emma, for your advice, and thanks to Richard for joining us. Thank you. When we spoke to Ofcom about this, it told us that it had first discussed the idea of one-touch switching with broadband providers back in 2019. Then in 2021, it gave them 18 months to implement it, a period that it says reflects the significant changes it would involve. In response to what Ofcom called this collective failure of the industry, it says it has implemented an enforcement program to make sure that companies get the system up and running as quickly as possible. We put Ofcom's criticisms to the one-touch switching company, which was set up by the telecoms industry to manage the implementation of the scheme. It didn't comment on why the initial deadline was missed, but did say that there's a concerted effort to ensure that all communication providers meet the expectations set out by Ofcom, and that they're working hard to introduce one-touch switching, after which consumers can expect a more streamlined and reliable switching process. However, in December 2023, a statement from the one-touch switching company revealed that its deadline of the 14th of March 2024 was no longer achievable because too few firms had begun testing the new systems in time. It said it was working on a new date.
Well, next to an issue that continues to make headlines, and I'm really sorry to say that since we first featured it in 2022, the stories only seem to get worse and worse. I'm talking about the chronic problem of mould and damp in hundreds of thousands of homes right across the UK. Now, shortly, I'm going to be speaking to one health inspector who sees the faults with the system every single day and does believe that there is a solution. But before that, here's a reminder of the first time we covered the issue. When we first met Jo Ford from Kingston upon Thames, she was returning to the flat she'd moved out of a month before.
Even being near here makes me feel like I'm struggling for words. My anxiety is going off the scale.
While it might look spotless now, the last time Jo was here, it looked like this.
I feel really anxious because I know where it is, and my heart is going like this.
Absolutely riddled with damp and mould.
So this is the north-facing wall, and this is where the mould went vroom.
Jo and her teenage son Levi moved into the flat in the summer of 2018. But when winter came, Jo noticed water around her windows, which became small patches of damp and mould. So she contacted her lettings agent and property manager.
I was really quite concerned, but I was told it was condensation. So, I thought maybe that I wasn't doing something right.
In an attempt to stop the mould, Jo tried to make sure that the flat was properly ventilated, but the damp just got worse. However, Jo says the property manager insisted that she and Levi were causing too much condensation.
They just literally deflected it back to me. And they told me to keep the heating at a low constant of 20. Now, as a single parent, with the heating and energy crisis at the moment, how am I meant to keep the heating on a low constant and afford that?
Jo says she followed the advice rigorously, as well as using mould and mildew spray and washing down the walls. But the mould returned. And while the lettings agent sent contractors who did clean the mould and treat the walls with anti-mould paint, it was only ever a temporary respite. The mould just kept spreading. It invaded her furniture, her clothes, and even her son's school shoes.
I had to throw away bedding because sleeping in a bed that was mouldy was really bad for my health, let alone it also growing on the wall beside me.
In November 2021, after almost 3 years of complaints, Jo contacted her local authority's environmental health team.
I got to a point where I was so exhausted. I was sitting on the edge of the bed and saying to myself, can I get through another day of this?
After inspecting the flat, the local authority ordered the lettings agent to put things right once and for all. But Jo also sought the help of a solicitor who commissioned a survey into the property, and the results were damning.
In his opinion, the moisture within the structure is likely to be caused by something called interstitial condensation. So that is water within the brickwork of the entire building, and this will require further investigation to confirm this. It makes me feel sick.
In May 2022, Jo and Levi moved out when the workforce moved in. They carried out additional mould treatment, installed extra ventilation, redecorated and installed a new kitchen. But despite the flat's now pristine appearance, Jo fears the damp might still be there.
I feel really anxious because, to me, this is meant to make it all look nice and glossy, but it's not about putting in a brand new kitchen. That doesn't eradicate mould.
Now she's seen the flat, Jo is convinced that moving back in isn't right, so she's decided to look for a new home.
There's no way I'm bringing Levi back here. We're both traumatised by this. He's traumatised, I'm traumatised, I've had sleepless nights.
When we first reported Jo's story, her lettings agent provided lots of information and told us it disputed Jo's claim that the mould issue was left unaddressed. It also said there were contradictory reports about the cause of the mould, stressed that it welcomed the local authorities' input to getting the issues resolved, and told us it acted in accordance with its obligations throughout Jo's tenancy. Since then, the issue of damp and mould in homes has rarely been out of the headlines, and in July 2023, the government introduced new legislation to protect tenants in social housing. But the Act does nothing to protect the 11 million people, like Jo, who rent from private landlords. So, what's being done to address that gap? Well, Felicity Hannah is here with me again to discuss this, and we're joined by Peter Wright, who's the chair of the Association of Chief Environmental Health Officers in England. Peter, let's put this in perspective. Give me the overall picture, because your members encounter this every day. How bad is the problem?
Yes, Angela, there are probably in England's private renters housing stock around about 200,000 very severe damp and mould problems that could affect severely the health of the residents in those homes. That's a huge problem for the tenants who are normally at the more vulnerable end of the spectrum in society.
Is it getting any better, or is it just getting worse all the time?
It's getting worse for a number of reasons. The largest down to the cost of living and fuel prices. To keep your house dry, it's an important thing to do is to keep the heating on and keep it warm. But to keep your house dry, it's also important to open windows. So that does cost money, so people are less inclined to heat the house properly and open the windows if they have condensation problems, for example.
I know that since we covered this issue, changes have been made to protect people who are living in social housing, but those changes don't affect people in the private sector, do they? Why is that?
The social housing sector receives funding and has a contractual obligation to the government that provides houses to a certain standard. In the private rented sector, the obligation on landlords is there to keep the house to a decent condition, But it's only a criminal offence if we are invited into the home by a tenant and then we find there are problems and we tell the landlords to fix the problems and they don't. So there's not as good an incentive for the worst end of the landlord market to keep the houses in a good condition. They can't get away with providing poor accommodation for years.
Now, Peter, I know that you think there are some fairly simple things that can be done to give protection to private renters. What are they?
I would like to see a change in the law that makes it a criminal offence for a landlord to let a property that doesn't meet a standard in the first instance. That would give an incentive to bad landlords not to do that and would help good landlords not suffer at the expense of bad landlords.
Well, Peter, if people are able to complain to you if they're private renters, why don't more of them do it?
There is fear in a large proportion of the poorer private rented stock that we deal with that the tenant, if they complain to us, will be subjected either to a no-fault eviction, a retaliatory eviction for complaining, or more recently, a retaliatory rent increase, which forces them out of the home in the same way an eviction would. So people are scared of retaliation from the landlord.
Well, when we put Peter's points to the National Residential Landlords Association, it told us that every tenant is entitled to live in high-quality accommodation, and that the overwhelming majority of private landlords provide properties on this basis, ensuring all regulations are met. However, a minority of rogue landlords don't do this, and the NRLA said they should be dealt with robustly by local authorities. It added that if condensation or damp is an issue, tenants should immediately contact their landlord, who can investigate before it leads to conditions that can cause harm. In the meantime, Felicity, what sort of standards are there to protect specifically private renters?
Well, at the moment, the government is consulting on whether it can extend something called the Decent Home Standards to private renters. Now, those have existed since 2001. They've recently been updated, and they cover the quality of homes in the social housing sector. But the government's reviewing tightening those rules and extending them across private rented homes, and also improve rights on mould and damp, whether homes are fit to live in. And it will make sure that landlords have to ensure homes don't fall into disrepair, and also keep them warm and dry, and make sure that they're upgrading facilities before they break down so that the homes stay usable and fit for people to live in.
All of that is down the line. In the meantime, very briefly, what can people do if they are living in a damp home now at the moment to try and get some sort of resolution?
They need to complain to somebody like our guest. They need to make sure that they're raising it with their council and making sure that their landlord is being held to account.
Well, Felicity and Peter, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
I don't know where the time goes to, but that's just about it for today. It's been a packed show, but remember that you can catch up on anything that you might have missed this week or indeed all this series on BBC iPlayer.
There's also plenty of information and more advice on our website, which is bbc.co.uk/ripoffbritain, where you'll also find ways in which you can get in touch with us and send in your stories so that our team can then investigate them.
So until we see you again, thank you so much for your company today, and from all of us here on the team, goodbye.
Bye-bye.